Welcome back to this afternoon session. For those who have no idea what's going on, like me, we have two wonderful lectures coming up before a tea break. And then following the tea break, we have two lectures and a presentation before I say goodbye to you with a little kind of soliloquy at the end, or probably not a soliloquy, but anyway. The intention is to finish off by 5:10, which is a peculiar time, but there you go. Say 5 o'clock, give or take. There won't be any questions and answers like this morning, just so that we can be on time. But at the end, when I come up and smile at you again properly, if there's anything you want to ask me, as long as you pay me enough, I'll give you the answers. But seriously, networking is what this is all about. So those of you who are going to be with us this evening at the dinner, gala dinner, please feel free to come up and speak to me or to anybody else that you would like to pick the brains of or otherwise. Equally, if you're not coming to the dinner and you've got time, some of us will be hanging about so that when it's officially over, as far as the lectures are concerned, you're still very welcome to come up and sort of say hello and ask me any questions. So let's get cracking. We have a very special gentleman here, the Chief Executive Officer of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society, no less. But more importantly, perhaps for this afternoon as well, you were the expedition leader in the search for and finding of the quest. So without any more ado, John Geiger, everybody.
Thanks very much. When I gave a similar version of this talk in Dundee in early December, and like today, I was a little bit surprised to discover that I was actually following the endurance presentation, talking about Quest. As I said at the time, it was a bit like when Led Zeppelin opened for the Monkees. But so bearing that in mind, I'm going to talk a little bit, and I've got this device here, about the final expedition of Sir Ernest Shackleton. It's intriguing to think that even before he embarked on endurance, that Shackleton was actually very interested in the Canadian Arctic. He made repeated visits to Canada, to Ottawa, where he met with the Prime Minister and other members of the Canadian government to talk about a Canadian Arctic expedition. And he was inspired in 1913 by a talk given by a Canadian-American explorer named Vilhjalmur Stephenson. And Stephenson, at that talk, and Shackleton was in the audience, declared that it was, and I'm quoting, it was fairly well settled that there is a single Antarctic continent, and no discoveries of new lands of considerable size are therefore to be expected in the South Polar region. He went on to say, the one place upon the surface of the whole Earth where the discovery of new land is possible is in the unexplored section of the Arctic Sea lying west of the Arctic archipelago. So as you can imagine, this was something of a monocle dropper for the audience at the Royal Geographical Society, and especially to Shackleton, who was preparing to embark on his endurance expedition. But Shackleton was absolutely intrigued. In fact, his early interest in polar exploration began with a book he had showed Arctic scenes and polar bears. And so he had this idea that at some point he would visit both of the polar regions. Stephenson, of course, had already been involved in several expeditions. And you can see this area, unknown area, shaded there. This is the area, the Beaufort Sea, that both of them were extremely interested in investigating. The truth is, we all know what happened in terms of Shackleton's endurance expedition. I'm not going to repeat that. Stephenson, on the other hand, did launch, following that talk at the RGS, an expedition to the high Arctic of Canada, what's now Canada, and it was an amazing geographic success. He identified a whole bunch of islands in the Arctic archipelago. He was sponsored by the government of Canada under a conservative government, a conservative Prime Minister, Sir Robert Borden. And so Shackleton very wisely named all of these major islands after the various ministers, conservative government, the leader, the Prime Minister, and other ministers So it became actually known as the Tory Archipelago in northern Canada. The difference between the two is that, of course, on the Canadian Arctic expedition commanded by Stephenson, there were 16 deaths. So contrast that to Endurance. Very, very different types of leaders, and I won't go into the background and the Karluk disaster, but and it wasn't just lives that were lost on Karluk. Other lives were lost on that expedition. So the contrast between these two leaders is quite stark. So after Shackleton returned from his Endurance expedition, he and Stephenson met again. They had met at the RGS previously, and they met at the club in London that Shackleton was a member of. And during that conversation, Shackleton mentioned that he was interested in going to the Arctic. He was interested in the Beaufort Sea. He was interested in a Canadian Arctic expedition. And Stephenson said that he would help him. He said, it is possible, I'm quoting, that in spite of your extensive polar experience, I may be able to give you assistance of value should you turn your face to the north. So Stephenson was putting his hand up to assist someone Stephenson called a friend. However, he himself had also a plan to return to the Canadian high Arctic. And it's interesting that they both were organizing Arctic expeditions. Quest was purchased for a Canadian Arctic expedition. It was a ship that was really designed for the Arctic, not for the more tempestuous seas of the Southern Ocean. So there was a sort of this struggle going on between the two of them. And Stephenson did everything he could to thwart Shackleton's plans. As soon as he would hear that Shackleton had been to Ottawa, had been talking to the federal officials there, literally 2 weeks later, Stephenson would turn up, and he would try to undo all the work and efforts that Shackleton had put into organizing this expedition. One key get was that Sir Ernest was able to win the support of Sir John Eaton, who's shown here with Lady Eaton in this photograph. And the plan was to call the expedition to the Arctic the Eaton-Shackleton Canadian Arctic Expedition. So this was the plan that Shackleton had. And as I say, he made repeated efforts to visit Ottawa and to lobby. He started to speak in his lectures about moving to Canada permanently. This may surprise some of the British visitors here today. And what's interesting is, of course, he was known as a man who was prone to flattering others. So, but when he was in the United States, he also talked about moving to Canada, not to the U.S. Take note, Donald Trump. I returned a flag today, by the way, the flag for the expedition to Richard that we carried. He has, so far we've not had to return the Canadian flag to our American friends. Sorry, I've got to go back because this. I have to explain that image. So this fight between Shackleton and Stephenson became more and more absurd, to the point that the Rideau Club, which is a very prestigious club in Ottawa, private club, was a battleground between partisans of Shackleton and partisans of Stephenson. Stephenson was put forward for membership in the Rideau Club by no less an eminence than Sir Robert Borden, the now former Prime Minister of Canada. That nomination was seconded by the Chief Justice of Canada's court, and yet it was defeated by a vote of over 63 members of the club, all of whom were part of the Shackleton faction. So this led one neutral observer to declare, "Polar explorers are as temperamental as prima donnas." So then we get to Quest. So Shackleton had, of course, acquired this vessel for his Arctic expedition. He began to recruit participants, including George Viber Douglas, a young Canadian geologist, to be members of this Canadian Arctic expedition. He made commitments that they would effectively be a Canadian expedition, not a British expedition. He made these commitments to the government of Canada, and he got Canadian sled dogs. It was basically all set to go. He had the ship, he had the crew, including many veterans of endurance, and he was pretty much set to go when he received in May 1921 a telegram from the then Canadian Prime Minister Arthur Meehan, which read, "Our arrangements now do not admit of assistance your expedition this year." So obviously a devastating decision by the government of Canada to withdraw its support for the expedition. Shackleton was not a wealthy man. He had leveraged the support he had to acquire the ship and provisions and supplies for this expedition. One of his early supporters, of course, was John Quiller Rowett, but he had a small contribution at this stage to the Canadian expedition, hoping that Canadians like Sir John Eaton would step up and help. So Shackleton was facing disaster, and that's the famous moment when Rowett stepped up and said that he would effectively fund the entire expedition. There were other small, modest donors, but really it was Rowett who saved the day and made the what became known as the Shackleton-Rowett expedition possible. So the expedition was beset by problems almost immediately. They didn't learn till many years later that the steam engines on the Quest were actually 30 years old. The vessel was much newer, it was built in 1917, but the engines were very old. They kept breaking down. Any of those that know the story know that they ended up having to make repeated stops to undertake repairs, including a lengthy stop in Rio. And as Frank Wilde wrote also, the vessel was not really designed for these much more tempestuous, as I say, oceans. And Wilde wrote, "It became clear to all that in this trip we were to have no picnic." So that was an early observation about Quest, which was rolling very, very easily and causing some members of the crew to become violently ill. In fact, several of them had to leave early because they were not able to stand the illness that they were suffering. Hubert Wilkins, who was the naturalist on the expedition, said that the agent who had purchased Quest on Shackleton's behalf must have been drunk and seeing double when he did so. It was also the vessel was so small that and Shackleton had such grandiose plans in terms of technologies and equipment to bring that they couldn't really. It was very difficult to squeeze everything onto the vessel. Anyway, these problems all sort of came together with the stress of having to try to salvage an expedition. This plan to go south was something that he had been thinking about, but Quest was really not built for some of the ice conditions that they would have experienced, and as I say, it was a really stressful period for Shackleton, and he was described at one point as looking tired and ill. A number of people commented on his appearance. He had lost some of that sense of joy, that he always had, and fun and play. And he had an episode in Rio where it appears that he had suffered possibly a minor heart attack. There was an incident where physician was called, but then of course Shackleton, true to form, no, I'm fine. I was just feeling a little bit faint, and all is well, and soldiered forth. But we all know how this ended with this absolutely terrible body blow to the expedition when Quest reached Grytviken in South Georgia. The light lifted. The terrible sort of burden that Shackleton had been carrying lifted. He went ashore as they cruised along the coast of South Georgia. He was reliving with Wilde and Hurley, Wilde and other members of the endurance expedition, some of their experiences and memories from that particular expedition. And they went ashore, and Shackleton was described as being cheery, his mood, and he wrote, of course, those famous lines, his last lines in his journal, including, "In the darkening twilight I saw a lone star hover gem-like above the bay." And just a short time after that, on the 5th of January, he suffered a fatal heart attack. And you can imagine the blow to the expedition when Wild had to tell the crew the next morning. They were assembled, and the crew could tell something was up. They were all out on deck, and they thought maybe the expedition had run out of money. There was speculation, but something clearly was unusual. Something was up. There was a strange mood, and they were told that Shackleton had died, and that the expedition would continue. And Wild felt that, indeed, that would have been Shackleton's wish, that they would have continued. And the expedition did continue, and spent some months in the in the Weddell Sea. They returned to Elephant Island, for those who had been there, part of Endurance. So, but it was not the expedition was not a success. They did visit a number of islands, Tristan da Cunha, a number of islands, St. Helena, of course, and others. On their way back, stopped at Cape Town. But all in all, the expedition was I think fair to say, a failure because of Shackleton's death. But his death, the fact that he died on quest, and with his death, historians have argued, came the death of the heroic age of Antarctic exploration, and that quest really, in this expedition, really symbolized the end of the heroic age and the start of the mechanical age, where technologies were being introduced. And indeed, on that expedition, they did have many of the new technologies. They had a baby aircraft that they were planning to take. In the end, they weren't able to fly it because of some of the reasons I've explained. But it was, in fact, they had a heated crow's nest, which I don't know if you've been to All Hallows by the Tower in London. Is actually, you can see the crow's nest. It doesn't look like a piece of cutting-edge technology to me, frankly, but apparently it had a heating element in it. So it was considered to be some of the innovations that they had introduced. So anyway, they came back. They were still received with great interest. I mean, the death of Shackleton had been, something that was, had haunted people, I think, in the UK especially. There was lots of coverage of the return of Quest, and Quest had this amazing afterlife. It wasn't solely notable that the ship was Shackleton's last ship. It was his last expedition, and the ship he died on, nor was it, the ship, the place where the heroic age really came to an end. But later on, Quest was reverted to Norwegian ownership, and it had a storied career for some decades after that. It was involved in rescuing some castaways from the Danish schooner Teddy in 1924. It was involved in the unsuccessful search for Roald Amundsen, the great explorer, when he went missing. And most notably, Quest served as the expedition ship for the 1930-31 British Arctic air route expedition that was led by a brilliant young British explorer named Gino Watkins, who was exploring the east coast of Greenland, and he tragically died at age 25. You can see him in the image over there. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Jamie, that kayak, or a kayak, is actually in the collection of the Royal Geographical Society. I think it's that kayak it is that one, yeah. Amazing. So, and even after this career, so Quest comes in and out of exploration history at numerous points, and then even when it was just a sealing vessel undertaking, commercial sealing work, it ended up being the subject of this book, which was based entirely on the experiences of the writer aboard Quest during commercial sealing enterprise. So really, Quest is a very storied vessel, and so tells sort of summarizes a critical period in exploration history and also commercial exploitation of resources in the Arctic. It was also involved, in fact, temporarily joined the Royal Canadian Navy during the Second World War. So really a remarkable ship. So the next chapter in this, very quickly, is that Quest was purchased for a Canadian Arctic expedition, ended her own journey in Canadian waters, or off the coast of Labrador. It sank on May 5th, 1962, after being trapped and damaged in ice. It had departed Norway February 21st of that year and headed for Norway, was suffering all sorts of mechanical issues, very true to Quest's pedigree along the way. It was taking on water, had various leaks. They kept using bilge pumps and whatnot to try to keep afloat and keep to the job of collecting seal pelts. But by late April, the situation was critical, and the leaks had become severe. At midnight on May 4th, Quest started leaking very heavily, and the pumps were not able to keep the water out. They gradually, by 1 a.m., the main engine was activated to try to get the water out, did not work, and later that day, the vessel, on May 5th, the vessel sank. And these images were actually taken. Other whaling vessels were called. There were distress signals, and they came to assist and get the men off. All the men who were aboard Quest survived, but sadly, tragically, Quest was lost. And this is the last image of Quest as she sank in the Labrador Sea. So I thought that because of the history linked to Canada, the fact that Quest had been purchased for Canadian Arctic expedition, had this remarkable kind of Canadian link to the great figure of Sir Ernest Shackleton. It'd be amazing if we could go back and try to locate Quest, and it would give us an excuse to tell that part of the story, that's of course always invariably overlooked. If you've read many of the biographies of Shackleton, you'll see, usually Quest gets like a paragraph on the last page. So I thought that, well, there's a story that really hasn't been told, and this would be an opportunity to tell it if we could find some supporters, because the Royal Canadian Geographical Society, I'm sorry to say, does not have a wreck finding fund. So I'm very grateful to the people who stepped forward, a small group of people, and compared to the Endurance, it's what was it, $20 million US dollar, budget or whatever it was. Ours was 400,000 Canadian, and as you know, the Canadian dollar is like a peso almost. So it was. But we managed to pull it together and do it. We headed out. We had a great team, including I'm sure some of you know David Mearns, the great wreck finder, who had kind of casually Zaz Shackleton, who's a friend. I'd actually met David a couple times, and we'd met at the unveiling of the new Shackleton Memorial at Westminster Abbey early last year, and so we I talked to David and got some advice from him and kept picking his brain. At some point I said to him, you wouldn't think of coming, would you, David? And he said, well, only if there's a 70% chance that we'll be successful. And I said, well, if you came, that would actually create a 70% chance that we'd be successful. So he did agree to come. We made Zaz our patron, co-patron actually, with Micmac Indigenous leader, Chief Michelle Joe. So they were, there we are in the Northwest Passage a few years ago, and I just included some photos to, like every tourist visiting South Georgia. And there's the Hope Cross, which is now in Dundee, and I saw it again in December in Dundee. So anyway, we put together this team. Again, very grateful to the sponsors who had the vision to step up, because it would never have been possible without their help. And we had a great story to tell, and I'm going to show you the map of where Quest. You can see the dotted line is where Quest was involved in its final hours and days, and then our expedition from St. John's, Newfoundland, last June. And I'm going to play a little video. I hope we tried this earlier and then we could hear the audio but not imagery, but let's see how it goes here.
We're leaving St. John's, and we're now on our way to Labrador. This is extremely exciting.
It's the uncertainty of it that makes it a really compelling and exciting thing to do.
really excited. We're finally getting to the point where we'll be deploying the sonar. You know, the towfish will know hopefully fairly quickly if the coordinates that were recorded at the time of sinking were accurate.
At the end of the day, we were left with one position that was recorded on a telegram within less than an hour of the vessel actually going down.
Finding Quest has been such a mathematical problem and, you know, a kind of a puzzle for the last several months that it's almost disconnected from the ship. It's really about all our planning, did it work out? So it hasn't hit home what it will mean once we find Quest.
We know what the ship looks like, so we'll be able to measure it, figure out, you know, heights-wise, so that's hopefully what we'll be able to find.
We're probably delayed at least 24 hours.
Yeah, that's pretty stressful. I mean, when you plan for redundancy, you've got all this high-tech gear, and it's a winch that is thwarting your plans.
No, I'm not happy. We're wasting hours here. Okay. And what's our speed? Like 6 knots?
You know, our backs were up against the wall, and then, you know, fortuitously, about 17 hours in, suddenly a little ship pops up on the screen. That's it.
That's the acoustic shuttle.
We knew it was it from the moment it appeared on the monitor. There's no other shipwrecks in that area, and it matches perfectly the dimensions of Quest. It looks like Quest.
That's it. We found the Quest.
All right.
I was euphoric. I mean, I was stunned. I couldn't believe we actually found it.
You only get one chance. Get a second chance. And so I wanted to make sure that they had the highest chance of success.
The first moment was relief. Oh my gosh, all this work has paid off. We were right. We actually did our planning correctly. But also after that is that wave of realization of, oh my gosh, this is Shackleton's ship. It's right beneath us, 400 meters below. This is a very storied ship. That's the money shot right there, actually. There you go.
We have some wonderful news. We have located Quest. The vessel is intact in 3. Some of your great friends are here with me and wanted to share the great news of this important discovery in Shackleton 150.
That is absolutely wonderful. I'm delighted. Warmest congratulations to you all. What a team you are.
What a great team. It's been amazing. We're very lucky, and of course thank you for your key role in helping to bring this team together. It's through you that we all know each other, so and I think that was the key to the success. So, thank you. So, thanks very much. So there you go. It's in a funny way, the type of ship we were on, the fact that it was rock, everybody was sick as dogs on this ship. We had a number of breakdowns. We lost many hours. You know, we were able to kind of, we found a guy named Harvey at a place in northern St. Anthony, northern Newfoundland. We had to go back, and Harvey fixed the winch, so we were able to go back out. During that period, he was fixing. At one point, his phone rang, and I don't know what someone said to him. I think it's like, "How are you?" This was like 6 in the morning. He said, "I'm slicker than a whale shit in an ice bowl," and we're like, well, what does that mean? I still don't know. If any of you know what that means, please let me know. Anyway, so it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun. So we're going back this year. We've already raised most of the money I need to go back this year. We're very excited because, of course, you saw those groovy close-up imagery of Endurance. We want to do that. We want to be able to get a proper look at it and then be able to tell a story, that through a documentary. So that's the plan. And we'll never be Led Zeppelin, but the Monkees have certain merit too, musically and otherwise. So anyway, if any, we're nearly there. But if anyone is interested, I did create this ad that I placed. There it is. Financial contribution required. Bitter cold, dense fog likely. Safe return also likely. Honor and recognition in event of success. So get in touch. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. In fact, earlier on this month, I had a letter, an email from a member of the James Caird Society, who said that his great aunt was on a world cruise and saw the Quest going off southbound. And he sent me a photograph from this world cruise ship of the member of the public taking a photograph of the Quest, which I just thought was a great angle, different angle altogether. We forget that there's a world outside polar history, if you see what I mean, polar exploration, ordinary people going about their ordinary lives. And here's this lady who knew full well that that was Shackleton and his ship going off to the south. And it's just a nice angle, I thought. It was wonderful. As far as the ad's concerned, I haven't got time now because we've got to keep to a strict time scale. I actually know the source of this mythological ad. So I might just mention this at the end of the session today. Somebody offered a reward. Are you in the room at the moment? Somebody offered a reward for anybody who could get to the bottom of how this advert was created. Anybody in the room offering the reward? Okay, fine, never mind. It's worth a try. So we now move on to lovely Seamus, who's going to explain to us much more about Shackleton's Irish roots.
Let's see. Good afternoon, America. And can I say good evening to Ireland who are watching my live stream? I hope my wife and my kids, I hope, at least. So, enough of that. We're going to look at Shackleton from the Irish perspective. The reason being is I grew up in Athy, where he was born. And until I became involved in the museum, I knew nothing about this man. I knew he was a polar explorer, but I thought he was British. I didn't know he was born very close to where I grew up myself. So, over the last 25 years, I've been immersed with Kevin Kenny and many others with the Shackleton Museum and the Shackleton Autumn School. And part of that has been kind of reclaiming his Irish heritage and bringing that to the forefront again. So, without further ado, I start with this date because for those who know the Shackleton story very well, that's a hugely important date in the story. That's the date these men leave Elephant Island. Those 6 men, 3 of them Irish, Tim McCarthy, Ernest Shackleton and Tom Crean, leave behind the 22 men in the uncertain position of knowing, will they ever be saved? Will they ever see their homes again? Now that is a huge resonance for this audience here today, but if you ask an Irish person what that date means in Ireland, it means something entirely different. It means this: Easter Monday 1916, the start of the Irish Revolution. So in that very same moment, as that boat's been pushed off in Elephant Island, a guy called Pádraig Pearse stands outside the General Post Office in Dublin and reads a proclamation of the Irish Republic, the founding document of the Irish state, essentially. And over the next 6 days, Ireland is in turmoil. At the end of the 6 days, Dublin lies in ruins. And at the same time, Shackleton's on the Southern Oceans with Tom Crean and his crewmates. And just bear that image in mind, because this will have a relevance as to why Shackleton was kind of forgotten about in Ireland for such a long, long time. So, how Irish are the Shackletons, and are they really Irish? They very much are, okay? So the Shackleton family comes from West Yorkshire, a village called Harden. But the first Shackleton to come to Ireland is a guy called Abraham Shackleton in 1725. He comes as a private tutor to some landed families. And by 1726, he's establishing a Quaker school in Ballytour. Ballytour is a small village about 7 or 8 miles from Athy. Now, the man on the portrait behind you is his son, Richard Shackleton. He succeeds his father as a Ballytour schoolmaster in the 1730s. This particular portrait was commissioned by Edmund Burke, the great parliamentarian and political philosopher. Edmund Burke actually was a schoolmate of Richard's in his father's own school, essentially. And so the Shackletons spent the next 100 years in the Ballytour area, running the school, getting involved in commercial life, getting involved in farming life as well. This is just an image, a pencil drawing of the Ballytour school in the 1840s or thereabouts. But by Shackleton's time, things have moved on. Ebenezer, his grandfather, gives up the Quaker faith and becomes a Church of Ireland Anglican as such. And at the time of Shackleton's birth in 1874, his father, Henry, is running a farm in Kilkee. Not terribly successfully, has to be said as well. So 5 of the Shackleton children are born in Kilkee. But in the meantime, because of the failure of his farming activity, his father decides to retrain as a medical doctor in Trinity College in Dublin. And so the family ultimately moved to Dublin. I'll go back a little bit there for a second. So 3 more kids are born in Dublin, and ultimately, though, they all moved to the UK in the early 1880s. And you might recall that Kevin mentioned, of course, Shackleton going to sea as a 16-year-old man. So here is a manifest from the Houghton Tower. I think I'm going to click it right, and there's Shackleton's name. And there he is, a boy from Kildare in Ireland. And oddly enough, there's another Irish boy there, Philip Blake from Cork, a boy as well. Whatever happened to Philip Blake, I wonder. Now, this is an audio recording of a guy called Thomas Pearce, who was a shipmate of Shackleton's on the Houghton Tower.
Shackleton was only a boy of 18 then. I was 20. He was a lad that you could never get at because when he wasn't on duty on deck, he was stowed away in his cabin with his books. He was full of poetry and could quote it by the yard. And history, he certainly was well schooled. The other lads used to say, old Shack's busy with his books, but on duty he was always first, up the rigging before the other boys. They never pulled his leg about his books. He was a very normal young chap, hail fellow, well met with everyone, cheerful and cheeky. He was so broad-shouldered that he looked taller than he was. I don't think he could sing, and he didn't swear, but he had a great voice.
So here we have Shackleton now. This is a little bit later on in life. This is probably in his mid-20s before the Discovery Expedition. And he is now looking for opportunities to advance himself as such, okay? So he joins the Discovery Expedition. This is actually an interesting menu from the Savage Club. And that is described as E.H. Shackleton. And that, unfortunately, that is not Shackleton at all. That is another man called William Shackleton, who was from Yorkshire. Probably a distant cousin. This Shackleton had been engaged as a scientific officer on the Discovery voyage as well with Scott. He fell out with Scott and was removed and replaced by Ernest Shackleton, of all men, would you believe? So, moving on to the rest of the family then. So, what kind of contacts were maintained with Ireland between himself and his family? Well, Kevin mentioned this morning that his brother Francis got into a little bit of trouble in Ireland. He was working in the Chief Herald's office in Dublin Castle, and the Irish crown jewels were stolen in 1907. There was a huge furore about it as well. He was implicated, but he came back to Ireland to explain himself and his history, and he was ultimately exonerated from it. And actually, it's actually mentioned in the report itself that he was found to have no responsibility for the crime as such. You see it there? We also had to mention a lecture about Helen Shackleton. This is Shackleton's sister, who was a fine artist, who was a friend of George Marston's. She returned to Ireland for 3 months in 1908, around the time that Shackleton was on the Nimrod expedition. And she took little sketches here. But this is actually Helen as a young child. This is actually quite intriguing. This is a sketch taken in Moon, Kildare. Moon is a small village very, very close to Ballytour and very, very close to Kilkee. This is a little commonplace book that Helen maintained. You might recall the playing of the Wearing of the Green there during Kevin's lecture, and she wrote out in a commonplace book the actual wording to the Wearing of the Green. So clearly the Irish heritage was important to the family, both himself and his sisters, and there was a sense of keeping those traditions alive, be it Irish music or Irish writing. Now we saw, of course, the huge furore when he returned from his Antarctic expeditions from Nimrod. This is the return to Charing Cross after the Nimrod expedition. At this stage, he's a global superstar. He's very popular. You see it in America. They released this song called With Shackleton in the Antarctic. You notice that the clothing is very makey-uppy, certainly not a Burberry outfit as such. It inspires a children's game called To the Poet Shackleton. He clearly is in the public consciousness. He's kind of in there in popular culture as well. He's giving lectures there in the Royal Albert Hall in London. And this is just interesting. This is just a poster that the museum acquired there in the last 2 years. It's a substantial thing, a 7-foot high poster, which will feature in our new museum. But it's a nice, interesting kind of cultural artifact from the period when he was traversing Europe and the States giving lectures. And you'll see here, of course, his extraordinary lecture program after Nimrod. Rome, Berlin, Vienna, Budapest, Hamburg. He also comes to Ireland, of course, as well, Belfast, Dublin, and Cork. I just mentioned this lady called Lady Dudley. She was the wife of the Lord Lieutenant in Ireland. She features in the Ulysses, but she was an inspiration to him. She established a nursing scheme in the west of Ireland for women. And she also appears in Ulysses, of all things, would you believe? Just there. There we go. Now, how do others view Shackleton? It's very hard to know sometimes. Arthur Conan Doyle was a very distinguished writer. He also had an Irish heritage as well. His mother was a Foley from Dublin, and his grandfather had antecedents in Dublin as well. But you can see that he was concerned about the tension in Ireland, between Ireland and Britain at the time. We talked about the Easter Rising breaking out in 1916, but of course before that there was a build-up to 1914, the Home Rule movement as well. And you see he had a concern that there was this kind of dissension between Britain and Ireland, but he saw the positives in the fact that Shackleton was kind of flying the British flag, but planted there by an Irishman. Roger Casement, a controversial figure in Irish society. He was a British diplomat. He was renowned for uncovering the abuses in the Belgian Congo under the power of King Leopold of Belgium. He had a clear sense that Shackleton was one of Shackleton's uncles was involved in Sinn Féin. I'm not sure that's entirely true, to be honest with you. But he saw them as being involved in the Irish kind of constitutional national tradition, the Young Irelanders and the Union. And funnily enough, actually, it's often mentioned there that of all the Shackleton children, only one girl was born in the UK. That was Gladys. And her siblings called her Sassenach when they wanted to upset her. And apparently the children's room was a source of many arguments about home rule as well at the time. But Roger Casement was clearly associating Shackleton with the home rule movement. I'm not sure that's entirely correct. You might recall that Shackleton ran in the Dundee parliamentary elections just after his return from Discovery. He didn't succeed, but he clearly espoused a kind of a pro-unionist kind of empire British kind of worldview, it's fair to be said. It was also mentioned in the Marston lecture by Allegra that George Marston was a friend of both Helen and Kathleen Shackleton. This is Kathleen here. Spent much of her life in Canada. John would know her very well. Did a lot of art in Canada, up in the Northwest Passage area, up in the Arctic areas as well. This is from our own museum's own collection. This is a portrait of Cecilia Shackleton, Shackleton's daughter, and obviously her niece. And this is Eleanor Shackleton, a very distinguished career nursing in Canada for 20 or 30 years. And I suppose the reason I mentioned her is because she was the last Shackleton to come back to Ireland. She returned to Ireland in 1958. And this is Eleanor here. These are members of the Jackson family who took over the farm from Shackleton's grandfather after the 1870s. This lady here is Juliet Green. Juliet just turned 101 in the last 2 months. The last person to remember the Shackleton family in Ireland. Extraordinary kind of link to history. And I just threw up this census form from the UK from 1911. We're never quite sure of how important his Irishness was to Shackleton, but clearly, he always recorded clearly that he was Irish, that he was from Ireland. And this is his entry here for his household in 1911. You see his birthplace here is Athy, County Kildare, Ireland. He referenced Irish publications when he could. This is the prospectus for the Endurance Expedition. And you'll see he quotes liberally from the various Irish papers at the time, Dublin Express, Freeman's Journal, the Irish Times. And this is actually a very interesting piece. This is the manifest from the Emma. The Emma was one of the many relief ships that Shackleton commissioned in trying to get help for the men on Elephant Island. And he wrote out by hand this manifest for the Emma. And here he's written out his own details in hand. Captain, his nationality Irish, and Tom Crean Irish there as well. This is just another manifest from a ship across the Atlantic. John mentioned, of course, many trips across to Canada and across to the States as well to fundraise as well. And this is just a little bit of fun. This is Shackleton shadowboxing on the deck of the Aquitania in 1917 with John De Vere, who was the world heavyweight boxing champ at the time. And just let's go back a little bit to that scene in Dublin in 1916. So I posed a question at the very start of the lecture. Why was he forgotten about? Why did I not know about him growing up? Well, I suppose Ireland was convulsed by the Irish Revolution for the period 1916 to 1923. Shackleton dies on the 5th of January 1922. A day later, the Anglo-Irish Treaty is signed between the Irish revolutionaries and the British government. And so when his death is published in the Irish Times a few weeks later, it's almost a footnote in history. It's quite striking. And this is just a little link, I suppose, another Kildare and Irish link to Shackleton's burial place. The gravestone was only brought over to South George in 1926 by the Discovery, his former research vessel. This man is called Mr. Richard K. Pease. He was born in the Curragh, County Kildare, and he's one of the ship's crews of Discovery who brought across the gravestone to mark Shackleton's burial place. And going back to Athy, I suppose we have tried over the last 20 years to raise the awareness of Shackleton. And I suppose one of the most significant events that we had was on the 31st of August 2016 when we unveiled the statue of Shackleton in the back square in Athy, County Kildare. And here's Alexandra. And here's the statue. Facing south, always south. And that, of course, is Mark Richards with a maquette. Mark is an extraordinarily fine sculptor and a beautiful image of Shackleton. Around the time of Nimrod in his full kind of Burberry gear and all his kind of sledging clothing. We've kind of endeavoured to kind of be kind of proactive about how we commemorate and mark him in Ireland, I suppose. And another issue we had 2 years ago is we created this mural of Shackleton at the binnacle of the Endurance. And this will kind of, if you're standing in our new museum, you'll see this image of Shackleton. So that's the museum as it currently is. We expect to reopen our museum sometime in July of this year, with an official opening towards the end of October. We would hope to see as many as possible over the next couple of years in Athy. And I'm going to finish with just a selection of things we've done over the last couple of years. We published a journal called The Nimrod. We recreated the James Caird on the bar there many years ago. During COVID, we had virtually Shackleton to keep the Shackleton dream alive. And of course, many of you will be looking forward to seeing the cabin installed in Ireland in the new museum. I'm just going to leave you with these kind of quotations. This is a fine summation, I think, of the tension between Britain and Ireland. Charles Sarolea was a Belgian. He was married to Shackleton's sister-in-law, a sister of Emily Dorman's, and he summarised very well, I think, Shackleton as a man straddling kind of two nationalities as well. And it mentions the fact that two countries will one day eagerly claim him as a national hero, namely England and the Free State of Ireland. But I'd like the final bit of summary at the very end. The truth is that Shackleton united the qualities of both races. I'm just going to leave you with a very short little video of our new museum. So the museum will tell the story of Shackleton from his birth to his death. And so on the ground floor you'll enter, you'll kind of get a general summary about polar exploration and also the environment involved in it as well. And then when you go upstairs to the second level, that will, in a chronological way, tell the story of his expeditions from Nimrod through Endurance through Quest. There's our little model of Shackleton on the ground floor. And the last major exhibit in the museum will be the Quest cabin. And you'll have a chance to kind of gaze upon the place where the man drew his final breaths. And I think it's kind of an extraordinary kind of resonance having the place of his death so close to the place of his birth. I think we're really looking forward to being able to share this with everybody here all over the world. And I think it's an opportunity for us. We don't feel we need to reclaim at this point in time. I suppose there's no harm to remind him that he was Irish, but he was international. He was everybody's, you know. I know he's much loved and appreciated in this country as much as in Ireland, but we're looking forward to kind of broadening his appeal and using it as a kind of a model for kind of inspirational leadership across the world. So these are just kind of a selection of images from the museum. And like I say, it'll be open in July of this year, and we hope that as many of you possibly at all will come to the museum. Thank you very much.
You've done us proud, Seamus. You're ahead of time. I've always felt that Shackleton was an Anglo-Irishman, I should say. Never doubted his Irish ancestry. That would be arrogant to deny that. I'm a great fan of what this man does and Kevin, who spoke to us at the beginning of the day. They work tirelessly to promote Shackleton in his birthplace, which I think is great. And if you are ever in Ireland, you really must go to Athy, County Kildare. It's 70 miles-ish from Dublin. Good, easy access by motorway. I'm running a convention for my Facebook Appreciation Society in Dublin in May 2026. So I shall be putting that online, and anyone coming to that convention would do themselves a great disservice if they don't jump in a car and go down the motorway and visit Seamus, and Kevin and their colleagues and the school they run. It's called the Shackleton Autumn School. It's the last weekend in October. Is that right? Every year. I've been to about 3 or 4 of them, but it's been running for 20 plus years-ish, 25. I was at the 3rd and 4th session, and then big gap. It's great. It's like this event, and it's Irish. So don't forget the Irish. Right. Thank you very much, Seamus. It's tea time. So we have 30 minutes break for tea, everybody, then please come back.